Welcome to the More Than ADHD podcast. I am your host, Ryan Mayer, certified ADHD coach and neuroinclusion specialist with Ryan Mayer Coaching. On this episode, we're going to talk about how tiny experiments can lead to big impact. If this is your first time here, I just want to let you know that the door is open, you are welcome, and you belong here. Please like, subscribe, and drop a comment for us, and you can answer our question of the day. Today's question of the day is, do you or your employees struggle with hyper curiosity? Do you get stuck going down those rabbit holes that you know you shouldn't be going down? Stay tuned and watch this entire episode because you're going to figure out from an industry expert how to avoid doing that and how to stay on track. Speaking of experts, allow me to introduce you to my friend, neuroscientist, and author of the book Tiny Experiments, Anne-Laure Cunff. Anne-Laure, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Welcome to the More Than ADHD podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. Where are you coming to us from today?
I'm in Austin at the moment.
Well, I would just love to have you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and let them know a little bit about you.
Absolutely. I write a newsletter every week called Nest Labs, where I talk about mindful productivity and how to live a more experimental life. As you mentioned, I wrote a book called Tiny Experiments that also explores these topics. And I'm a researcher at King's College London at the ADHD Research Lab, where I study hypercuriosity.
Whoa. You said you study ADHD at King's College.
Yes, I do.
This is great. So did the research come first or did your book come first, or was it sort of a little bit of both?
A little bit of both in parallel. I do like having several projects going on at the same time. So I enjoy writing online. I really liked also writing the book. And I liked sometimes also being able to put that aside and just be in the lab and do some neuroscience research.
Well, I would love to know because I remember when you told me a few months back about the research you were doing. For those who might not know about the lab that you're in and that kind of research, what does that involve?
My research specifically uses EEG, electroencephalography. So the way it works is that we ask people to sit in front of a computer and we ask them to complete certain tasks and we record their brain waves while we do that. And we like to work with both neurotypical and ADHDers and compare their brain activity to see what differences there may be.
That's incredible. And those who are tuning in, and this might be the first time that they've had the pleasure of hearing about you or learning about you, you have a very unique accent. So can you tell the listeners where you came from and what led you to do what you're doing now?
Yes, I'm French Algerian. I grew up in Paris, but I lived in New York and San Francisco. I'm currently living in London, hence why my accent is all over the place. And in a past life, I was working at Google on the digital health team. I left my job there, did a startup that didn't work out, and then I went back to university in my late 20s to study neuroscience. I did graduate school and I completed my PhD in neuroscience last year, all while writing the Nest Labs newsletter, which has about 100,000 subscribers now.
Incredible. NESS labs.com for more information. Well, as I'm sure Anne-Laure and I are going to get into this episode, there's absolutely still stigmas that exist and persist about ADHD. And despite those being out there, you don't have to stop that from you living your best life. That's why I chose to partner with ADHD Online. They offer comprehensive remote assessments to get you diagnosis for your ADHD and also continue your care afterwards. Medication management, get you connected with therapists. They are top notch. So check out ADHDonline.com and you can use discount code CoachRyan50 for $50 off of your assessment. So use that at checkout. Anne-Laure, in preparation for our episode today, I was just looking through your bio and you talked about something that I think is really going to resonate with a lot of the business leaders and a lot of the high-level performers that are listeners and followers of the podcast. Just this culture of high achievement, how it's very much like the grind, go, 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 who's working the latest? Can you burn the midnight oil? And I was shocked because I didn't know this, even though you and I have been friends for about a year. I didn't know about a potential life threatening blood clot that you were literally thinking, all right, how can I schedule this around my company retreat? Like, I'm sure looking back on it, it's as crazy as it sounds, but yet when you're in it, like, people are very much brainwashed. Can you tell us more about why people are feeling this way?
Yeah, I think there are several factors that come into play when it comes to this toxic type of productivity that we're all suffering from. One of them is the fact that the world has evolved in a way now where we all have access to seeing the success of others. It's as if there was this giant leaderboard because of social media where you're not only aware of the achievements of your current colleagues, but when you think about LinkedIn and all of these other platforms, you even know where all of your childhood friends and classmates have done with their lives and with their careers. And because of that, you kind of want to keep up, and you
Sure.
feel like I need to work harder, I need to do more, I need to be more productive, and this is how I'm going to make sure that I don't fall behind. So that's one thing. And another one is this inherent fear that we have as human beings to disappoint other people around us. And that could be disappointing our manager, our colleagues, letting them down, but that could also be disappointing our friends, our spouse. And because of that, we put an inordinate amount of pressure on ourselves to always perform or at our best, even when that means sacrificing our health.
Can I tell you how deeply this resonates with me? And I'm even getting a little emotional even thinking about it because you just essentially described my entire corporate career where I was sacrificing everything for my career. And then even times when I would get let go or I would choose to leave a job, I had this period of grief where I would look back and think, why did I do that? Like, what was that for? I missed out on special times with family or going out with friends to work later, to submit another proposal, to do another thing, to check another box. It, I haven't heard that term very often before about toxic productivity, but that's exactly what it was. Poisonous. I remember my family coming to me and saying, Ryan, you don't look good, because I wasn't eating. I was just drinking a ton of coffee, and just pushing myself harder than I needed to. And I think, to your point, seeking the approval, wanting to get that social proof to put that out to say, hey, look at everything I'm doing. But also, I can remember all I wanted was to get the recognition of my supervisory team for them to say, you did a good job. And I felt like I could never do that. Have you come across this in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. We're social creatures. When you think back about what life was like thousands of years ago when we were living in the jungle, the approval of others meant survival. Being excluded from the tribe meant death. So you would do everything you could for the rest of the tribe to accept you, to protect you, and for you to really be part of this group. And even though the world has changed a lot, our brains haven't really changed. And so we're still seeking this approval. We're seeking this sense of safety in numbers and
Oh my
feeling part
gosh.
of the group. And that drives a lot of our decisions.
And this is such an important topic too for anyone out there who's listening. If you know someone who has ADHD, or if you yourself are neurodivergent, I'm sure you've come across this too, Anne-Laure, with us experiencing this rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's like, if everyone else who is neurotypical in the world is trying to get approval, for us, it's even that much more extreme, right?
Absolutely. And this is why you have a lot of people with ADHD who are reporting overthinking and rehashing and reliving conversations that they had with other people where they felt like they were rejected. And then if you ask that other person they had the conversation with, a neurotypical person they had that conversation with, and you ask them how that conversation went from their end, they'll probably not even remember the interaction at all. While the ADHDer is here just rethinking every word and thinking that they said something wrong.
I kid you not that probably on a monthly, if not every other week, I have some sort of nightmare about previous conversations with bosses that I'm sure that they don't remember at all. So it makes sense to me. So, how does this goal setting, and I'm going to say, like, always striving for achievement, how does this lead to the mental health crisis that we find ourselves in.
When we push ourselves in this way for a long time, this can only lead to burnout and overwhelm. So that's why in the book, I advocate for an alternative, which is a more experimental approach that I call mindful productivity. So instead
Ooh,
of toxic productivity, really thriving for mindful productivity. And the mindful aspect of it is really about being more intentional. And instead of just trying to manage your time and trying to cram as much stuff as possible in every single little box, like you do in toxic productivity, where you
mm-hmm.
try to be as productive as possible, you really look at each of these boxes as a separate playground that you can experiment with, and where you can ask yourself, okay, in that box, what do I want to do here? And you take into account all of the factors that you know are important to you. What are your energy levels right now? What are your attention levels right now? And based on that, what is the task that makes the most sense for me to focus on right now? Not just trying to do the most stuff possible and just going through a very long to do list, but shifting your mindset from this quantitative perspective of time from a more qualitative one.
Wow. I love this idea because I know I am as guilty as anyone that I'll get frustrated with myself if I don't complete everything on the to-do list, which is not even realistic anyway. So it's not surprising that this is an issue for so many people. And I love that you came up with this idea of mindful productivity. And how does that lead into tiny experiments?
So, mindful productivity, as I mentioned, is really about being more mindful of your relationship to work,
Mm,
how you complete your tasks, how you manage your time. But contrary to what I know a lot of people would like to be able to do, they would like to be able to just copy paste a framework and just say, that's the way I'm going to be productive. And in the book, I explain that in order to figure out what mindful productivity is to you, you need to experiment. You need to try different things, different approaches, and you need to observe the results. And so, a tiny experiment, as I define it in my work, and I recommend people trying it, is to say, okay, for this specific duration, I'm going to perform this specific action, and I'm going to withhold judgment until I'm done performing the experiment, until I'm done collecting data. And I'm going to decide whether I want to keep going, whether I want to tweak this, or whether I want to abandon the experiment altogether. So let me give you a few examples. So let's say that you're someone with ADHD and you've been really struggling to perform certain tasks in the morning. You've been trying, you've been using your willpower, pushing through and blaming yourself. It's just not working. One tiny experiment you could run is to say, this task that I've been struggling with to do every morning, what if for 2 weeks I do it after lunch in the afternoon? I'll just try that. And I don't know if I'm going to be successful. The goal is not to be successful. The goal is to learn something new. At the end of the 2 weeks, I'll look back and I'll see whether that was helpful or not. If that wasn't helpful, that's okay. I can design another tiny experiment. Maybe the evening is better. Or maybe that time block I've assigned to this task is too long and so it feels overwhelming and that's why I'm not getting started. What about I'm going to keep it in the morning, but instead of having this 1 hour block, I'm going to say that it's a 20-minute block. Let's see if that helps. That's having an experimental mindset. That's designing experiments, collecting the data without self blame or self judgment, evaluating the results, and then making decisions based on that new data.
this is revolutionary. And I know that that sounds maybe extreme, but for me, and I know a lot of my clients who I coach throughout the world, the self judgment piece is the hardest. So I love that you said to have it just be, and I think the word tiny is so important. It's just a tiny little experiment. And you try it, you do it without judgment or blame. So essentially, we're staying neutral to it. And then, and I also really like that you said learning is more important than the success. Like, this
Yeah.
is a simple, but so powerful, like a mind blowing idea to me. This is great.
Yeah, you're basically just becoming the scientist of your own life. Think about a scientist who's looking at their data. Imagine that they get not the data that they expected, something different. They're not going to blame themselves, saying, oh, I'm such a bad scientist. Why does the data look like this? No, they're just going to look at the data and feel like, huh, interesting. I didn't see that one coming. What can I learn from this? And how can I implement what I learn into the next iteration of my experiment? And that's it. No self blame, no self judgment, just collecting data.
This is so good. And it reminds me of a word that I use for myself, but also encourage my clients to use, which is fascinating. So instead of getting upset and having that negative self talk, instead, anytime you get a result to a tiny experiment you weren't expecting, you can say, fascinating. So I love this idea. Become the scientist of your own life. Amazing. So if no one's ever tried something like this before, any suggestions on how people can think about implementing this more on a regular basis?
Yeah, I know a lot of people might be very excited to just design their first tiny experiment straight away, but I highly recommend that you start from observation. Again, just like a scientist. A little exercise that is actually really fun to do, and I recommend anyone listening or watching this tries, is to pretend for 24 hours that you are an anthropologist, except that instead of studying a different culture, you're studying your own life, pretending that you don't know anything about it. You're just new to it. You arrive in this new culture, you have your little notebook, and you look at your life and you ask questions like, why do these people care about these things? Why is this thing more important than this one? Why have we been doing this thing in the morning every day instead of in the evening? Why do we do things the way we do them? Really questioning a lot of your routines, your patterns, your assumptions, and a lot of the things that you consider normal in your life because you're new to it. You're this anthropologist who doesn't know anything about it. Do this for 24 hours. You can look at your calendar, look at your meetings, and ask yourself what gives me energy, what drains my energy. After you had conversations with people, you can also ask yourself, oh, was I excited? Was I bored? And just take little notes. You can do that in a notebook or on your phone, doesn't matter, just 24 hours. When you start doing this, you open a window for experimentation because you start noticing interesting assumptions and you can start asking, wait a minute, what if we did things differently? Let's try an experiment. And you can pick something that you've been doing for a while in a certain way and just do it differently. Or you can say, I noticed that every time I give a presentation to my team, I have a lot of energy. What if I design an experiment where for the next 4 weeks, every Monday, I'm going to give a short presentation about my vision for the company or something I learned recently. And at the end of the 4 weeks, I'm going to see if I want to keep going or not. That's how you start, from observation, just like an anthropologist. And then from these observations, you will start noticing potential research questions and you can design an experiment.
This is so great. And it reminds me of the work from David Gawork, who was one of my mentor coaches, the founder of the ADD Coach Academy, where he talks about giving yourself permission. So it's okay to try things differently and see exactly, it's an experiment, see how this works for you. And what I think you might end up finding is that we could redefine success. And that's one of the things I'm wondering about. If you have thoughts around, in a world that's measuring success about, how many followers do you have? How much money do you make? Like, can we look at this a different way?
So, when you think about success, there are two ways of looking at it. One of them is to look at external metrics of success,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one is to look at internal signals. The problem is that a lot of us are only focused on the external metrics, whether that's money or followers. And these can actually be fun to chase and to explore. That's completely fine. But the problem is when they become our only obsession at the expense of other signals that might be important. Internal signals include how you feel, your levels of excitement, fear, anxiety, your relationships to people that you care about, what your life looks like at the moment, and whether that's the kind of life that you want to design. If you have success based on those external metrics, you're making a lot of money and maybe you have a lot of people reading your work and everybody is saying, oh, Ryan is so successful. But every morning you wake up and you have this sense of dread because you actually don't want to do that work. this internal signal is very important to you and you should be listening to it. So I highly encourage anyone who's asking themselves, what is my definition of success? To take into account both the external metrics and the internal signals.
I am getting so much value, and I hope everybody here is getting value from this. And I want to ask this question for people to comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, comment below and answer the question: how do you define success? And we're going to be talking later about how you can get Anne-Laure's book. It's coming out March 4th, 2025. So we're going to talk about that, but think about that question. And Anne-Laure, when you were talking about that, I went immediately back to a moment that I had when I was seeing some success on social media. And I'm so grateful and proud to say I have over 500,000 followers across the various social media platforms. But there was a moment that I remember when I got stopped in my tracks. And that was when my wife, Andrea, said to me one day when my face was buried in my phone and I was replying to comments and everything else. And she said, Ryan, and she had to say Ryan to like get my attention again. At what? Yes. And she said, sometimes I feel like you love your followers more than you love your family. And man, that still like makes me tear up a little bit because I was chasing that self-worth from the wrong place. And so I had been ignoring the signals. So that's such a great point. And I love that, external metrics or internal signals. So just think about this. If you're listening right now, this is a powerful question. And this is why you need to make sure you're following Anne-Laure's work, because this is flipping the whole script on everything. This is great.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And I think the story you shared is such an important one to share with people because that's the problem when we don't pay attention to those signals. Very often, it's someone else who has to remind us of what is actually important and meaningful in our lives. And sometimes it's fine, they're okay to share that with us and to still stay with us on this journey, but sometimes it's too late. So if you can practice paying attention to all of the signals and not just the external ones, you're more likely also to keep on being able to nurture those meaningful relationships in your life.
And it also makes me think of how many celebrities and famous people that you've heard of that have all of these external markers of success, but there's still people that are struggling mentally and emotionally, and that their self-worth is tied to all of that. And if their song isn't number one or their movie isn't a box office smash hit, then they really struggle with that, when really it doesn't matter as much. I would go so far as to say that it's never too late to get answers to these questions you might have. And that's why I always recommend, if you're having questions around your ADHD, you can go to ADHDonline.com. The answers that you seek might be there. And you can use this discount code, Coach Ryan50, for $50 off your initial assessment. And we've had hundreds of people that have taken the assessment, and this is changing lives. So, Anne-Laure, something that's been on my mind as we're talking about this is a lot of my clients struggle with perfectionism. And I'm wondering, how can this whole idea of tiny experiments help us to remove this big block? Because I was just on a call with a client right before our interview, and she was struggling with this. So, any thoughts on that?
I'm so glad you're asking this. There's an entire chapter in the book called Intentional Imperfection.
Wow.
And this is really all about that. This is about embracing the fact that it is absolutely impossible to be 100% perfect across the board in every single area of your life. The problem is that most people, when they realize that they're struggling to be perfect across the board, again, self blame, self judgment. That's the natural response that we have. When in reality, when we accept that it is just impossible, has nothing to do with us. It's just literally impossible for us to be 100% everywhere. If you're 100% somewhere, you're going to be less than 100% somewhere else. So, what you can do once you've accepted this fact is that you can start being more intentional about your imperfection. And you can actually decide and say, okay, there's this pretty important thing coming up. Let's say, for example, I have a big presentation with this very important client on Thursday. I actually need to be near perfect for this. This is very important. Because of that, I know that I'm not necessarily going to have the same level of attention, the same level of presence, maybe with my spouse and with my family. But if I'm being intentional, I can give them a little heads up. I can tell my spouse, I have this presentation coming up, and I know I'm probably going to be so focused on this that I might not be as present as I would like to be here at home. So, first, please be a little bit understanding. I'll make it up to you. We can go on a date afterwards. But also, if there's something important that I don't notice this week because I'm so focused on this presentation, please feel free to nudge me a little bit harder than usual so I can notice that I didn't do the thing that you needed me to do. Just giving them a little heads up.
Yes.
And not trying to be perfect in that area of your life, just saying, I'm not going to be perfect, but I know it. My spouse knows it. And so there's no suffering around it anymore. Just the imperfection without the self blame and the self judgment.
It's such a beautiful thing. And thankfully, for anyone who's met my wife, they will know that she will have no problem giving me that nudge as hard as she needs to remind me. So that's really good. And I remember a client of mine told me this phrase, and I really liked it. And it reminds me of this intentional imperfection. The way she put it was take messy action. So it's like, as long as you're moving forward, like you're still making progress, even if it's not exactly how you wanted it to look. So, Anne-Laure, this has been such a great conversation. I'm just wondering, for people who want to figure out, how can I apply this in my life? What are some of the, I don't know, a couple practical pieces of advice you might give them to try to remember from our conversation?
So the first one is, if there is any area of your life where you're currently struggling, you have doubts, you're not quite sure what to do next, instead of trying to figure out the perfect plan, the perfect method, the perfect framework, just ask yourself, what's a tiny experiment that I can run here to try and see if a different approach might work better for me? So that's number one. And number two, embrace the fact that life is uncertain, that you cannot be perfect across the board, that things get messy sometimes, and that's completely okay. It's not your fault. And you can look at it like a scientist and ask yourself, what can I learn from this? And what can I tweak? And how can I iterate? If you do that, even if you don't have the perfect plan, you can trust that you're going to progress and you're going to grow.
This is absolutely incredible. Yeah. And I had written that with a big star next to it. Become the scientist of your own life and look at the results that you're getting as neutral and just say that word that I like so much. Fascinating. And just stay neutral about it. So before we let you go, I would love to know, where can people find out more about Tiny Experiments? Where can they follow you and your journey?
Thank you. Yes, the book is available anywhere online to pre order or to order, depending on when you're listening or watching to this. Just type Tiny Experiments and you'll find it. Or you can take a little walk to your local bookstore and support your local bookstore by getting the book there. And if you'd like to read my newsletter, it's at nestlabs.com. I send it every Thursday and I talk about mindful productivity, curiosity, creativity, and a lot of the topics that we discussed today together.
Thanks so much for coming to the More Than ADHD podcast. And I'm so excited to see where this journey continues to go for you. Speaking of people who are making great strides in research, my friends over at ADHD Online just got confirmation that their online ADHD assessment is more effective, more clinically significant than an assessment that's done in person. So if you don't want to wait weeks or months to have to get your assessment, check out ADHDonline.com and discount code CoachRyan50 to get $50 off. And they can help you with your medication and care management after that as well. Well, we just want to say thank you so much to all of you for stopping by to watch or listen to episode 18 of the More Than ADHD podcast. A big shout out and thank you to our guest, Anne-Laure Cunff, my friend and fellow creative. And lastly, make sure that you check out the Ryan Mayer Coaching digital community. There's a link below where we're going to be talking about all this stuff from the podcast episode and more. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, and share this with a friend who might need to do some tiny experiments in their life.